Spider-Man gets new powers and he gets a new suit. This story's amazing. So this is the official start of the 8 deaths of Spider-Man. And one of the cool things that's going to happen is we're going to invoke the Octessence, which for those of you guys who don't know what that is, we are going to talk about it. It'll probably appear in the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, especially given the return of the Scarlet Witch eventually. But what this does is this initially picks up with Spider-Man kind of doing his thing, but basically he's met with the arrival of Doctor Doom. So do you guys recall in the Avengers story that we did, at least those of you guys who saw it, where Doctor Doom appeared to the Avengers and then kind of questioned everything they stood for, right? With Doctor Doom being the new Sorcerer Supreme, a mantle that he gained at the end of Blood Hunt when he effectively took Doctor Strange's powers. Well, the idea is that he's basically doing this across the universe, right? To like all these different superheroes showing up and then calling them into question, the whole 9 yards. And what he does here is when he appears to Spider-Man, he basically just kind of says like, I have a task for you, a task that only you can basically uphold and no one else. And Spider-Man's initially like dismissive, right? He's just kind of like, okay, whatever, man. Like I've got more important things to worry about. And it's kind of done in a hilarious way, right? Like Doctor Doom's just like a task for which you are uniquely suited, right? A task at which you must prevail. And Spider-Man's just kind of like staring at him for a second. And he's like, your stunned silence belies understanding of the gravity of the situation. And Spider-Man's like, no, I was just trying to come up with like an elegant way to basically tell you to shove it. So I love that Spider-Man like has this whole kind of not taking it seriously, but in effect, like he's kind of thrust into this situation because what ends up happening is you're met with the arrival of a guy named Centros. Now, Centros is new to Marvel Comics. He's never appeared before, but he's strikingly similar to Cyttorak. There is a reason for that. When Centros shows up, Spider-Man initially, kind of goes to fight him for a minute, and then Centros just sort of like, shoos him away in one of the funniest ways ever, right? He calls him like a fleck of spittle, which is kind of amazing. I've never heard that phrase before, and I kind of want to just like hurl that insult at somebody. I don't know why I would, and I can't think of an occasion where I would need to, but I kind of hope maybe one day I can. But what this guy talks about is the fact that like the covenant is upon them. And that's what Dr. Doom was talking about, right? Like this is a covenant that you are now a part of, Spider-Man. It is unavoidable. And so what ends up happening is that in the midst of this fight, Spider-Man's met by the arrival of Dr. Doom. And initially Spider-Man's just kind of like, okay, like what's going on? Because this guy is quite literally using gravity to his advantage. He's manipulating gravity. It's like, how in the world do I defeat this guy? And that's where Doom says, any who perish fall victim to your negligence. Accept my task, receive my aid, or their deaths will be on your head. And Spider-Man ultimately says yes. And that's when Dr. Doom says, pay attention. And he tells him this kind of story. He says, from the Darkhold Chronicles, Age of Strange, the young Sorcerer Supreme explored the lengths and depths of his magnificence, and while their potential inspired awe, he quickly discovered the limits of his human power. In order to guard the Earth and its environs from the countless threats of the immaterial cosmos, he would require aid. Bargains would be struck. Doom would never have required such unreliable and insufficient systems, but we play the hands we are dealt. While studying the eldritch histories of the Darkhold, Strange discovered the unassailable Crimson Casket of Cyttorak, ample protection for the Earth. For this dimension, however, the Crimson God Cyttorak is generally immovable in body and mind, as is well known. Strange, nothing if not clever, entered into a parley with the god in order to sway him toward a pact. Eventually, a covenant was forged, but Strange quickly learned that cleverness and intelligence are not the same. Now, here's where things get really, really interesting. For those of you guys who are familiar with Cyttorak, bear with me here for a second, because I imagine a lot of people watching this probably are not. Cyttorak will likely become a major player in the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but we know that from like the events of Infinity War, right? Like those red bands that Doctor Strange used on Thanos, those were the Crimson Bands of Cyttorak. At least it looks like those. Now, because Doctor Strange didn't actually say the spell out loud, you could really make an argument that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Cyttorak, Chthon, Mephisto, they're all one and the same, right? They're effectively the same being, just kind of operating in different ways. But In Marvel Comics, Cyttorak is part of a group called the Octessence. Now, the way this works, most of you guys have heard us talk about the idea of the Elder Gods, right? These incredibly powerful beings that existed on Earth at one point in time. Cyttorak and Ragador and those guys were all part of that group. What ended up happening is that a kind of contest was basically brought together by these guys. The idea being that each of them would leave an artifact on Earth. And because it's the Octessence meaning 8, what this meant was that there would be 8 individuals that would pick up these artifacts. And when they did, they would each lead 1/8 of humanity in a war against the rest of humanity. And the idea was to basically answer the question, who's the most powerful of these entities, these elder gods, more or less, that exist out there? And whoever's avatar on Earth won with their 1/8 of humanity, that would show who the most powerful person was. And so on Earth, as most of you guys are probably able to guess by now, the avatar of Cyttorak on Earth is Juggernaut, hence the nature of the inscription, whosoever touches this gem shall possess the power of the crimson bands of Cyttorak. Henceforth, you who read these words shall become forevermore a human Juggernaut, or something like that. But basically, like when Cain Marko picked up the gem, it turned him into the avatar of Cyttorak on Earth. Colossus also had the same role at one point. What this does is it brings in a whole other side of this history that we never knew before. And so what we're told here is that in exchange for erecting the casket and protecting Earthrealm, Strange had to commit to besting the 8 scions of Cyttorak, the restless, spoiled, terrible godlings eager to prove themselves worthy of their father's throne. Strange thought it a fair bargain because he believed he found a loophole in their cosmic contract. There is one rivalry that precedes the Allbirth, Cyttorak and Ragador. Strange armed himself with the sacred reeds of Ragador, which all but assured that should he fall at the hands of the Crimson Scions, he would be reborn and thusly never lose. The Covenant demands that at the top of the Crimson calendar, Earth put forward a champion to battle the Scions for Cyttorak's amusement. And so it's cool, right? Because what it establishes here is that Doctor Strange essentially kind of prevailed, right? Like every time the Covenant was invoked, Strange answered and paid the mighty toll to maintain the casket every single time. There's little I admire about Stephen Strange, but his tenacity cannot go unrecognized. And so in effect, he does this every single year. And so what ends up happening is Dr. Doom tells Spider-Man, because I've got more important things to do, you're gonna fight in my stead as my bannerman. It's the most Dr. Doom thing ever, right? Now, have no illusions here, and this is a fight that we've never seen. It's a fight I would love to see. Dr. Doom going against Cyttorak. That would be kind of cool, because one of the things to keep in mind is that when it comes to these incredibly powerful beings that exist out there in these other realms and so on, they're effectively gods within their own realm. So if you travel to the flickering realms of Chthon, he's unstoppable, this immutable force. The same thing with Cyttorak, Ragador, so on and so forth. It goes on and on and on and on. And so what ends up happening is that when Dr. Doom gives these new powers to Spider-Man, he says, Earth's Sorcerer Supreme, I declare Spider-Man is Earth's new champion in the Covenant of Cyttorak. You will face the Scions of Cyttorak as my bannerman, armed with the tools to aid you, arcane armor to give you access to the mystic arts and protect your physical form, and 8 of the life-restoring reeds of Ragador. Face the Scions, beat the Scions, protect the Earth. This is the word of doom. Now, here's the cool thing about this, right? Doctor Strange is incredibly powerful and incredibly capable, but truth to tell, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. It's not to say that he's dumb, right? I mean, it's not one of these things where like the engine's running and there's nobody behind the wheel. He's not an idiot, but he's nowhere near as intelligent as Spider-Man is. And so with someone like Peter Parker, it's all the powers that would normally be available to Doctor Strange combined with Peter Parker's intellect. You can only imagine how quickly this fight ends. And it's cool because what ends up happening is a Citros just kind of declares that it is in his nature to manipulate and to control gravity itself. He's the thing that binds everything together. Now, he's really speaking more in metaphors than anything else, but he's kind of arguing that he's like a fundamental force of gravity, but inside of him is what's called a black heart hole. In reality, you can just call this a black black hole, right? A singularity, a gravity well, whatever you want to call it, right? Just infinite gravity forever. And so what goes on is that Spider-Man actually ends up realizing that because of the nature of the powers that he has, he intrinsically knows how to just counter these spells. Now, that is a little bit different from what we're familiar with when it comes to magic wielders in comics, when it comes to Doctor Strange, when it comes to Jericho Drum Brother Voodoo, and the kids that are part of the Strange Academy, and like Wanda and so on and so forth. They have to learn these magics, right? They have to learn these spells and incantations. They cannot just suddenly know how to do it. So we can likely assume that it's just knowledge that was given to Spider-Man by way of Doctor Doom in order for him to achieve his goal. I mean, after all, it wouldn't make any sense to give him all these powers, drop him in the middle of a fight that he has to win or the Earth is going to be destroyed, and then give him no ability to know how to use these powers, right? Like, tell him you want to delay the fight, you got to study for the next 10 years, right? It's not going to work that way. So it just kind of makes good sense that it all comes together. But what Spider-Man says here is that by way of his knowledge, he's aware of the fact that the luminescence of limitless Langolin can not only fill a black heart hole, it can overload and destroy it. So literally, he punches this guy's heart, and what follows is essentially spaghettification. Now, that is an actual scientific term. I don't know how many of you guys have actually heard of that, but spaghettification is really, really fascinating. I mean, it's brutal and gruesome, but it's fascinating. In effect, the gravitational pull at your feet is drastically more intense than it is at your head. So within the span of less than a second, right, literally your feet are pulled in first, you're stretched to the very limit until, as Neil deGrasse Tyson describes it, you become a stream of atoms descending into the abyss. That's literally what happens to Spider-Man. He's spaghettified and sucked down into this black hole. Now, of course, Centros is destroyed as well, but with this first test down, Spider-Man wakes up in the afterlife and meets Phil Coulson. Now, Phil Coulson's existence in the realm of death actually has nothing to do with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and his death during the events of Avengers and supposedly resurrection during Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The cool thing about this is that he's actually the new cosmic entity of death in Marvel Comics. That actually goes in the events of Infinity Watch, and even before that, it went into, I can't remember what the name of the story is, but it's the one where he's tricked by Mephisto into basically altering reality so that there is no Avengers, and like Hyperion and the Squadron Supreme run everything. Of course, it all gets set back and you learn about the Council of Mephistos, right? Literally a multiverse of Mephistos working together to conquer the multiverse. It was amazing. It was a phenomenal story. I don't think we didn't cover it or we never finished it. But what ended up happening more recently in the Infinity Watch comics is that while Mistress Death was confined to the actual Death Stone, Mistress Death, as part of this stone, actually resurrected Phil Coulson from the dead, and he temporarily took her place as the new cosmic entity Death. And so when Spider-Man shows up here, like, of course, Phil Coulson knows who Spider-Man is, right? Like, and under this new role, he knows who's supposed to die and when and all that kind of stuff, but he's also aware of like all the little in-betweens and all the small little adjustments and tricks that you can pull off to basically save yourself from the realm of death. And so that's where he's just kind of like, okay, like, for what it's worth, I jumped right to cause of death in your file. Whatever your name was, you'll always be Spider-Man to me, right? Indicating, of course, different versions of Peter, different people play Spider-Man across the multiverse and so on and so forth. But then Coulson realizes that Peter has the reads. And so he's like, I am so sorry, man. Stay strong, dude, because you're going to be back here. And so Spider-Man literally resurrects from the dead. And he talks about how like the entire nature of these reads really kind of feel like a reversal of the natural order. That when a person dies, they're supposed to stay dead. They're not supposed to cheat death and come back from the dead or anything like that. And that's why he says, like, I don't want this, right? Nothing in magic comes without cost. The cost of defying the very foundation of a mortal existence. It's inconceivable pain. Pain worse than anything Spider-Man has ever felt. Now, it's only temporary, but when he comes back, he's met by essentially the spirit of Stephen Strange. The reason being because Doctor Strange's main body was turned into a vampire, and then he kind of lost his body, and so now he's in a spiritual form, and there's a whole great big huge thing behind it. It doesn't really matter. The important thing is Stephen Strange literally says, hey man, I know this sucks, but like, you got to do it 7 more times. Because if you don't, the Earth will be destroyed. Now, again, we don't know what Doctor Doom's main motivation is behind putting all the various superheroes through these kind of tasks and so on and so forth. We have no clue what the end goal is. We'll find out in the One World Under Doom storyline, but until it comes out next year in 2025, we're just kind of playing guessing games. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. We've got 7 more issues, I believe, until this story arc wraps up. So of course, we'll cover them. Next one comes out next month, and I will catch you all later. Peace. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man, the story where Spider-Man has to fight the scions of Cyttorak, and every time he does, he dies and then comes back to life. So this is a story where he faces off against the scion Sirius, and I think we forgot to cover the second one. We'll have to go back and do that. But Sirius is really, really cool, right? As I like to call her, Serial. So here's what goes on here, right? Like we picked up at the end of the last story, which again, I think we forgot to cover, when Peter Parker was basically celebrating his victory, or at least kind of enjoying his victory, and having dinner with Shay, basically his new girlfriend, Sirius appeared as a little girl on a red bicycle, and she immediately pulls him through time. Now, the cool thing about this story is that it is going to have time travel shenanigans, but it's not going to be overly complicated. It's going to be just like regular time travel as you imagine it, just jumping back and forth through time. Although the ending is amazing. And so what this does is it initially leads to Serial grabbing Peter Parker and taking him into the past on the night that Uncle Ben died. And for a moment, Peter Parker gets caught up in this whole scenario, right? If I can just get inside and stop the bullet, I can save Uncle Ben. He doesn't realize that he can't necessarily change things. Now, one of the things that I want to specify here when it comes to altering the past in Marvel, because in a lot of these instances, you're going to see the question, or really have the question of, what if Peter Parker did intervene? What if Peter Parker did save things and change things and so on and so forth? How would that work? So when it comes to time travel in Marvel Comics, you guys are aware of like the multiverse and branch universes. Most alternate realities in Marvel are the result of time travel, right? Which is to say, like, Spider-Man goes back in time and stops himself from getting rid of the Venom symbiote that in turn went to Eddie Brock. Well, now there's a whole other alternate reality where he kept the symbiote. Some of these alternate universes just come into existence on their own. The original Ultimate Universe is a really good example of that. But in this instance, it's going to be one of these things where Marvel's going to play it kind of fast and loose. That while the idea of altering the past can be done, and it will lead to an alternate reality, Marvel's also going to kind of tell us there is no changing the past, but it is more of like a metaphorical representation of who people are in the here and now. And you'll see what I'm talking about once we get to that point. If it seems a little complicated, I promise it's not. And so once this whole situation unfolds, Spider-Man's forced to witness the death of Uncle Ben. That's when Serial tells him, that's why I'm here. That's your challenge. I'm taking you through time. There's nothing you can do to stop me, and I am going to force you to rewatch every single death you've ever experienced. Now, one of the things that I want to specify here as we get to this moment with Gwen Stacy is this was a very contentious moment in Marvel Comics when Jerry Conway wrote it. And honestly, I don't even know if Jerry Conway has actually definitively answered which one happened. So on the night Gwen Stacy died, you kind of see things playing out exactly the way they're playing out here. The Green Goblin ends up snatching up Gwen Stacy, and then ultimately Gwen Stacy dies. There are 2 ways in which this story is interpreted. The first is that Gwen Stacy was already dead, which was a statement that was made by the Green Goblin within the context of the story. The second interpretation is that when Gwen Stacy was knocked off the top of the bridge and she went flying down into the water, or was supposed to go into the water, Spider-Man shot his webbing into her foot and her neck cracked. And so the argument there is that Spider-Man, in his recklessness, unintentionally killed Gwen Stacy. I don't know if there was ever a definitive answer on which one was which, and fans have debated that for years and years and years, decades even. Fans have like gone back and forth on which one actually happened. But regardless of how that scenario played out, the significance here was the death of Gwen. That the death of Gwen Stacy, as Sal over at Comic Pop put it perfectly, he said that it was one of these stories where, like the way that Uncle Ben taught Spider-Man the true nature, that with with great power must also come great responsibility, the death of Gwen Stacy taught Spider-Man he cannot be reckless, and that he, as a superhero, has people around him that care about him, and putting those individuals in jeopardy by way of just kind of being nonchalant and cavalier about his antics could ultimately come back and backfire on him. And so the death of Gwen Stacy was a huge moment in the Peter Parker mythos. And so as he looks over these moments, he says, this is Sirius' trick, distraction, keeping me off balance. So all I can do is react. I know that I cannot save Gwen the same way that I could not save Uncle Ben, but I can end this stupid contest quickly. And he goes on the attack. But nothing happens because she literally yanks them through time. Now, one of the other things that I also want you guys to notice here is that with all the powers that these scions have, they're but a fraction of the power of Cyttorak. So if at the end of this story, Spider-Man has to fight Cyttorak, I have a very difficult time in seeing how he can win. Because what you're seeing over the course of this, as easy as it is to miss, is you're seeing Spider-Man facing off against an astronomical being, somebody with the ability to manipulate time. And when it comes to manipulating and controlling time, they're an almost nigh indestructible force, right? The same thing as with Reverse Flash in DC Comics. How do you defeat a guy who exists in all moments at one time? He can always come back because you never know which version of him you're going to be facing off against. But with time travel, this girl could come back and save herself. She could go into the past and keep someone like Spider-Man from ever coming into existence in the first place. The entirety of the universe becomes your plaything if you have the ability to manipulate time. You can even go back far enough and prevent certain things happening in the universe of incredible significance. For example, the emergence of Galactus. And so with the ability to manipulate time, it's no wonder Marvel wastes Kang the Conqueror the way they do, but it's also no small wonder why Serial is so incredibly powerful. Because when Spider-Man goes on the attack, when he's brought to this bell tower and time is manipulated, it's from the old Web of Spider-Man comics, the Amazing Spider-Man stories, after Secret Wars 1984, when he tried to get the symbiote off of him. But through all of this, he sees it all as kind of a distraction, and his main focus is Serial herself. But every time he tries to attack, he gets yanked at another point through time. And this particular instance, it's when Eddie Brock is down in the bell tower. So basically kind of around the same moment that this is all happening. Technically, it counts as teleportation, but if a person is standing in front of you, they freeze time and then they step, 3 feet to the left of you and then they unfreeze time, is it really any different from teleportation as far as your naked eye is concerned, right? It's all more or less the same thing. And so with that being the case, she's like, okay, you only hesitated a few seconds that time. That's really well done. Shall we see where we end up next, or when we end up next? And that's kind of the bigger message that she starts to give to him, because as he starts getting yanked through all these moments, she says, "Champion, I am not like my brothers. I have studied you humans since Strange first brokered his deal with my father. Your lives are but flickers, yet you spend all of your time in the past or the future without the power to change either. The inevitability of time is not just about aging, but also change. While you physically change, Champion, your failures are embarrassingly forever the same. It is predictable and so boring." And that is a profound statement to make here. Yes, the overall gist of the story is that Spider-Man is basically working on behalf of Dr. Doom, right? The guy who took the powers of Doctor Strange, and he's kind of the earthly savior against the forces of Cyttorak, right? When Doctor Strange made a deal saying, "I'll fight your avatars like once every year," or something like that, and if I win, then you, Cyttorak, do not invade Earth. If I lose, the Earth is yours, right? So sure, Spider-Man is carrying out that campaign right now, and hopefully he wins so that the entirety of Earth and the universe itself don't fall to the whims of Cyttorak. But the bigger point is the nature of time and human action. The reality is that for a lot of us, you, me, and so many people out there, we do kind of live in the past, right? We do focus on past failures. If I had done this differently, if I had done that differently, if I had invested in Bitcoin back when it was fractions of a cent, I'd be a billionaire right now. But you can't do anything to fix it. You can't do anything to change it. And if you can't fix something, why are you worried about it, right? If you could fix something, you'd be fixing it instead of worrying about it. And if you couldn't fix it, worrying about it wouldn't do any good. But for us as human beings, we often occupy anywhere else
than the moment. Sometimes we do, but oftentimes we don't. It's not necessarily to say that it's a failing, but she asks, it does make me wonder, how can you not see that failure is your only option no matter when you are? In the past or the future. And so it's one of these things where the reality and kind of what Serial's missing here is that, yes, like we as humans make terrible mistakes, right? And oftentimes we spend more time looking to the future or looking to the past than we do living in the present. But it's also because we as people are reactionary, right? It's only ever after we screwed something up that we realize we screwed it up in the first place, because we don't always know what the right answer is in the moment. And so to say that a human being focuses a lot on the past, in some ways it can be dwelling, in some ways it could be living in the past, neither of which are healthy. But what human beings also have the ability to do is learn from the past, to study the past and to say, where did I go wrong? Okay, well then I just won't do that again, or try to avoid that as best I can. And then looking to the future is simply looking for those future pitfalls that you would now recognize because of your past experiences. And so it's very, very important for us to be able to look at both the past and the present. But for a character like Serial, somebody all-powerful, the ability to manipulate time, because she can go back and forth, whereas we as humans can't, she sees time in a wholly different way. Just don't do that, right? And that's it, right? For us, it's a little more complex than that. But through all of this, right, Spider-Man says, I hate time travel, all the paradoxes and meaningless changeable rules. But a paradox is exactly what I need right now. I attack Serial directly and she just skips to another time. I have to work smarter, not harder. And so what ends up happening is she brings him again to another moment in his life. Peter Parker recognizes it immediately and he says, hey, since you like the sound of your own voice, answer a quick question for me. You're the inevitability of time, right? So you should already know who wins this fight. She says, you fool, you think you can. Still, you can barely move. And this is the moment when Spider-Man was walking out and the guy who ultimately ended up escaping to shoot Uncle Ben, right? Stop that thief before he makes it to the elevator. And that's where Serial says, like, you will see that you fail in every single time. How pathetic. But because of the fact that Serial had brought Peter Parker here to his own past in order to force him to watch himself allow the criminal to escape that will kill Uncle Ben, Spider-Man is here. It's his past version of himself. And so he immediately recognizes what's going on in hearing his future self talk and goes on the attack and like literally goes after Serial, right? And that's why Peter says, she said, surprise me as she dragged me back and forth through time. So I slowed down for a second and I thought, right? I set my mind to being in the right place at the right time and trust my real superpower, my brain, to do the rest of the work. And then I use my lesser powers to clean her clock. And so literally just kind of like knocks her out in the moment. Now, of course, there is a bit of a conversation between himself and his, past self. And it's just kind of like, don't you love paradoxes? And it's like, I mean, I guess, I don't know, man, like time travel shenanigans. I mean, does what just happened fly in the face of everything we know about time travel? For the most part, yeah. But like, who cares? It's amazing. At this point, I don't really care. I'm just going with the story, man. I just love it. But of course, this pisses Serial off to no end. Because as you would imagine, when it comes to like such a powerful demonic entity that has the ability to manipulate time, they're not really used to being defeated, especially when you walk in with an incredibly high level of confidence and arrogance. Then it's just kind of like, who are you to question me? Who are you to tell me that I'm wrong? And so in the face of that, and in the face of that challenge, of course, she immediately gets pissed off and kills Spider-Man on the spot. And what she does is she doesn't really kill him by like disintegrating him or anything like that. She actually splits his mind across every single moment in his life. So in the same way that like Dr. Manhattan from The Watchmen sees every moment in time simultaneously, that's what's happening to Peter Parker, except it's his own life. He's experiencing every single moment in his own life all at one time. It's unimaginable pain, like nothing he's ever experienced before. It overwhelms his brain and literally he dies, probably from some kind of an aneurysm, or his brain just shuts down. But at that point, he wakes back up again. Another life has been spent here. And so what that does is it actually kind of gives him a new perspective on the world, because at that point he switches over to Shay. Now Shay, again, is effectively his girlfriend, right? I mean, there's no real reason to call them anything other than that. And what she does is where Peter talks about how stressed he is, of course, not really being able to go into detail about, the whole avatar of saving the world and the universe from the nigh calamitous destruction that it would experience at the hands of Cyttorak, that ultimately she's just kind of like, okay, well then I'll take you on a picnic tomorrow. But then after that, he ends up coming across Aunt May. Now he is unemployed. He doesn't work for Osborne Industries anymore. There was a donation that was promised to Feast and Aunt May by Norman Osborn. Peter was supposed to ask about that. He forgot about it. So it's kind of the responsibilities that he still owes to other people in his life. Kind of the Parker Luck, the core story of Spider-Man, right? Try to balance that life between being a superhero, keeping your identity and your actions hidden, and people who don't know about your secret life, but also do have expectations of you. And so initially he just kind of snaps at Aunt May, like, I'm doing the best I can, right? Just cut me some slack. But then he immediately kind of calms down, right? Because he remembers enough to know that, like, snapping at Uncle Ben and then realizing Uncle Ben died, right? It's just kind of a guilt that really carries with you probably for the rest of your life. And so where Aunt May ends up going home after Peter's apologetic, Peter goes to visit with Black Cat Felicia Hardy. Now, of course, Felicia Hardy's single at this point in Marvel Comics, so we both know that if Peter was just like, hey girl, let's head back to my place, she'd do it in an instant, because we all know, man, like she's got it, right? She's down bad for Peter Parker. But there is a great conversation between the two of them, because there is a somewhat will they, won't they type thing between Felicia Hardy and Peter. And sure, they've certainly touched naughty bits in the past, but there is also a very close friendship between the two of them. So much so that, like, one, Felicia Hardy knows his secret identity, and two, she also knows everything that he's doing right now, facing off against the scions of Cyttorak, really Cyttorak's kids and that kind of thing. But there is this moment where he's just kind of like, I don't know if I can make all of this stuff work. And in fact, he says that, right? I don't know how to make it all work. I'm not sure that I can. Trying to balance my personal life, the normal life as Spider-Man, trying to deal with crime in the city of New York, helping the average person, and then now I'm an avatar for saving all life on Earth at the hands of Dr. Doom, who has the powers of Doctor Strange, and I don't even know if I can pull all this off, right? If I fail, the Earth and the universe, it'll all go sideways. And so one of the things that happens is that Felicia Hardy says, there is so much in life that we do not control, but happiness, small moments of delight, we can claim those for ourselves, and we should, unapologetically. And so it's really awesome, because while she is to a degree saying, like, this is the reason why I'm a criminal, there's a lot of wisdom in that statement, right? Like, life moves on whether you want it to or not. And when the time comes that you and I and everybody that we know are just bodies in the ground, the world will go on, and eventually the world will forget or scarcely even know that we even existed in the first place. But still, time marches on. The world keeps spinning. And it's not to say that our lives are meaningless, it's simply just to say we are but one person on a planet full of billions of people. There is so much that we cannot control. There is so much that we just can't snap our fingers and just fix everything instantaneously. So finding those small little moments of happiness in this life, companionship, trips, vacations, amazing food, Peter Luger's steakhouse, all these little moments here and there, we should just pursue them. As long as we don't bring harm to other people, or as long as we don't break any meaningful laws, of course the exception being Luigi, that at the end of the day, we should just pursue these things about happiness, right? We should pursue these moments of happiness in our life. And so it is quite profound, right? It's a very profound statement. Now, of course, Peter's like, is this where you're trying to talk me into being a criminal? And she's like, hey, look, man, I mean, I'm not saying you should become a criminal. I'm just saying there's something to be said about having a life where you just sort of do what you want to, and that's it. And so she's just like, I need to get this bag, this bag out of here and hand it over so I can collect my $2 million. And Spider-Man's, yeah, so like about that. And she's like, did you stink, Peter Parker? And he's like, I know, because I assume he used some kind of magic to like set the crown back to where it was supposed to be. I'm not entirely sure. But pursuing these moments of happiness, right? These small moments of happiness when you can, where you can, because tomorrow's never promised to anybody. Where he initially intended to cancel on Shay because he didn't know when the next challenge was going to arrive, he's just kind of like, you know what, I'll go for it. So like he just shows up there with some $8 wine from a bodega, which I gotta be honest with you guys, don't do that. For Spider-Man in a Spider-Man comic, yes, it's funny. If you show up to a picnic with your girl with an $8 bottle of wine from a bodega, unless like that's all you can afford, that's a wholly different circumstance. But if you can afford better, don't go cheap, son, especially when it comes to something like wine. They ultimately end up just kind of enjoying the afternoon together, right? They just spend time together. Because for Peter, he's just grabbing these small little moments because he doesn't know what's going to happen next. He doesn't even know if he's ever going to see Shay again. There's no clue as far as he's concerned on how things may play out. But through it all, he's actually being watched by Calix and Kyra, right? The next two challengers who are seemingly twins that work together. But here's where the ending gets really, really cool, because those of you guys who are familiar with Cyttorak are looking at these kids and you're looking at these scions and you're just kind of like, okay, cool. But like the only one that matters is Juggernaut, right? Like the earthly avatar of Cyttorak. Rob, where is Juggernaut? Well, ladies and gentlemen, Juggernaut's in Alaska, playing video games on a couch, enjoying his time, going for a 3-point shot. But what ends up happening is suddenly he gets a kind of signal of sorts, right? Something resonates with him on a personal level, and he just gets up and leaves. And it's like, why are you quitting? And it's like, there's something wrong, right? I need to go focus on something. And it's like, I can't play, I have to prepare. So seemingly this is gonna go one of two ways. Either Spider-Man is going to fight Juggernaut, or Juggernaut is gonna help Spider-Man against Cyttorak. But Juggernaut is bound by the power of Cyttorak. So who knows what's gonna happen? But we'll find out, guys, in a month. With that being said, we're gonna bring this to an end. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section, and I will catch you all later. Peace.
What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the 8 deaths of Spider-Man. And yeah, Spider-Man just basically gets broken in this whole thing, and it's really, really interesting. So as we've talked about, and again, there's a playlist to get caught up if you need it. In essence, Spider-Man is fighting the children of the demon Cyttorak, the guy who gives Juggernaut his powers, and that if he loses, Cyttorak will be allowed to invade Earth. So as you can imagine, Spider-Man has to win all of these, but every fight that he engages in will result in him dying. And so that right there is enough to break him. But the fight that he has in this particular story, it's on a whole nother level, and it's really, really cool. So initially, the way this fight breaks out is it kind of goes between Calix and Syra, however you want to pronounce it, and they kind of fight as a duo. Now, what's going to be really interesting about this is the fight with Syra is the really cool one. Calix sucks, right? This guy gets beat like that, and literally Spider-Man makes a joke out of it because they both represent kind of the inevitability of something, and it's sort of a duality in terms of how it works, right? The inevitability of pain and the inevitability of death. The two kind of go hand in hand. But the fact is, with Calix, it's more than simply just physical pain. It's also emotional pain, different things along those lines. And so because of the fact that he and his sister have been watching Spider-Man, and also because Calix is kind of an idiot, he ends up sending his dogs, so to speak, pets, essentially, after individuals, innocent people, and the people that Spider-Man loves and cares about. Now, while that happens, Calix tries to kind of attack him on and off as things go down. And for the most part, none of it really works, right? Spider-Man webs up the animals pretty quickly, and then Calix jumps in for the actual fight, and Spider-Man absolutely pummels this guy. The whole thing happens over the course of like 2 pages, right? Like he beats the tar out of this guy. And it's kind of funny because when it's all said and done, Spider-Man's like, I mean, look, would you just yield? Like, this is embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for you. And I'm a guy who knows what it's like to take a beat down. And where Calix is like, I refuse to submit, right, to somebody like you who's a worm, Spider-Man's like, okay, so first I was an insect and now I'm a worm. I don't really know. It seems like a step backward, right? But that's when Syra shows up. And this is when it gets really cool, because at that point, Calix is like, okay, have your fun, right? Like, have your turn, sister. And that's when she tells him, I represent the inevitability of death. Now, this is a very, very awesome part in the story, right? It's one of the best things that goes on here because it's not some grandiose fight. It's not some huge conflict. Spider-Man thinks it is, right? Spider-Man thinks it's going to be the two of them going back and forth, and she represents the inevitability of death because she's just so powerful, there's no way Spider-Man can win, and so of course he's going to die. She says it is a challenge, and if you fail the challenge, you lose the contest, right? So you're going to have to get with this. But she says, this is a sphere, and your job is to hold this sphere, and you just hold it. And that's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, Spider-Man's just kind of like, okay, like he starts casting all these protection spells and things like that. And she says, it's not that kind of challenge. Your wards are meaningless. And she says, hold this sphere until you can no longer bear it. If you set it down, the challenge is over and I win. Now, Spider-Man's just kind of like, okay, so like, does it burn the heat of like 1,000 suns or something? And she's like, no. Pain is Calix's unimaginable obsession. The sphere shows only truth. I have found that truth is unbearable for your kind. And Peter's like, how do I win? And she's like, you won't. But he's like, but I mean, if I could, how would I win? And she's like, you just hold the sphere until it has nothing left to show you. And so Peter picks it up and immediately he's whisked away mentally to Aunt May as she's sitting on her deathbed. And this is so incredible, right? It says, Maybelle Parker Jameson is an accomplished philanthropist whose ability to inspire compassionate action amid the suffering of others earns her the post of chairwoman of the International Feast Organization at the age of 79. In the winter of the same year, a virulent plague sweeps across the earth, catching officials and health experts unaware. The initial surge of the Essex virus kills over 3 million people in less than a month. As a cancer survivor, May is especially vulnerable and her ability to breathe on her own becomes gravely compromised. Her caregivers try multiple interventions, but her lungs will not absorb oxygen. The sound of the breathing machine is deafening. Doctors must yell their explanation that the only remaining course of action is intubation and induced coma. May chooses instead to offer up her bed to someone with a greater likelihood of survival. She is resolute in her generous decision. Her caregivers honor her wishes and move her into triage, where she will be made comfortable with a morphine drip until she dies among strangers. As she drifts off to endless sleep, chest heavy with labored breath, May Parker dies wishing she could have kissed her Peter, her son, one last time. And that's where Zero kind of shows up here, and Spider-Man's just like, inevitability of death, right? So that's your thing. I've suffered more loss than you can possibly know, lady. I can watch sad movies about my life all the time. And she's like, you will. Just wait, right? You will. So then you switch over to Mary Jane Watson, who more recently in Marvel Comics has become a superhero named Jackpot. Her comics are okay. But it says Mary Jane Watson is no stranger to pain. As a child, she survived a broken home and abusive father. As a young woman, she suffered the brutish plots of other abusive men, but refused to let those battles dull her spirit. She fell in love with a family friend, but lost him to cosmic folly. Of course, talking about One More Day and the whole Mephisto storyline. When her most recent companion inherited the power to bend reality, she chose to use it to help others before losing their children. As she battles one of the greatest villains her city has ever known, part of her reflects on all this and wonders, could I have done things differently, lived differently, loved differently? Because for everything I think I did right, it feels like I never quite hit the jackpot that I was promised. And as the life drains from her body, only one answer comes to her. Mary Jane dies in the arms of her former lover and friend, dissatisfied. Now, this is really fascinating here, right? Because in a few different ways, it kind of points to the idea that MJ always felt like she was destined
to be with Peter Parker. And the fan base would largely argue that, right? More out of nostalgia than anything else. But the fan base would argue that MJ and Peter are supposed to be together, right? Just like fans of Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy would have argued that Peter and Gwen should have been together, not Peter and MJ. So it kind of depends on which kind of romantic connection that you like the most. But it's one of these cool things because Peter, in observing all of this, is like, I get this game. Who can get bored first? This is cool. I'm winning. Right? The future isn't written. This is just some emo fanfic from some demon chick who sits around all day smoking cigarettes, listening to The Cure. And she says, true, it's possible she dies in her sleep at 94 or chokes on some fruit tomorrow. What is indisputable, however, is that her life will end. And Peter's like, I mean, yeah, I know that, right? Everybody who lives will ultimately die. But the kicker is Sarah says, yes, you do know it. But now you feel it, and it just goes one after the other, right? J. Jonah Jameson dies of a brain aneurysm. He's replaced as the head of the Daily Bugle within a week. Shay Markin, right? One of the closest people to Peter Parker and his love interest at one point in time, she dies in a car crash. Robbie Robertson's son, Randy, he's trampled to death in a protest that ultimately turns violent. In the case of Felicia Hardy, she's swinging around and the rope snaps and she just falls to her death. It says after that happens, her considerable estate is confiscated by the government and earmarked for redistribution into the prison industrial complex. But again, constantly kind of back and forth and back and forth, Peter kind of seems to play this off. And it's like, I mean, sure, like all these people are going to die, you know, it's just kind of the way things are, right? Betty Brant grows old and she dies. That Norman Osborn grows old and he dies or just kind of dies in the midst of an experiment. It happens over and over and over again. Miles Morales, Bailey Briggs, Gwen Stacy, these spider people. What's really interesting about them is it says their deaths will be meaningless in the resolution of the cataclysm. They do not die as martyrs. They do not die as heroes. They just die. Humans full of potential and promise and love and fear and confusion one moment, empty shells of meat and viscera the next. And that's where it really starts to hit Peter because he's like, no, they're kids. But at the end of the day, Sarah's like, human children die too, even brave children. And again, that's where death shows up. Of course, being played by Phil Coulson because Thanos is running around with Mistress Death confined to an Infinity Stone. I know, it's weird. It's really cool, but it's weird. But the response here, right, is that when Phil Coulson shows up to take Miles Morales, Spider-Man intervenes, right? And that's where Coulson's like, Spider-Man, oh, wait a minute, no, that's right. You're still in the Covenant, aren't you? Right? Because remember, when you're death, you're a cosmic entity. All time exists simultaneously, right? So he's just kind of like, wow. So yeah, okay, you're still in the Covenant. You're going through the whole Sarah trial, aren't you? Like where she's showing you everybody who dies. And it's really fascinating here because as the two of them are talking, right, and Peter's trying to stop Phil Coulson, that this illusion no longer is an illusion for Peter. It's a reality. He's just like, no, you can't do this. And the whole time that it's going on, that you have Sarah, who's kind of narrating this whole thing. She says, you see, it's not the pain of dying. You've felt that pain before. You've died yourself. It's not the fear, though that can sometimes be terrible, but you understand fear. So that's not going to impact you either. It's not the loss itself, as great as it may be, and as sorrowful as it is, uncelebrated and unnoticed, or even a heralded death. What you understand now with crystal clarity each time you see a fellow human die is the utter lack of impact they had on the world. With a long enough view to the horizon of the cosmos, no single life matters. A foundational element of your worldview is crumbling more with every death to which you bear witness. Everyone dies. Everyone is forgotten. Every legacy ends. Every great work is lost. You came from nothing. You return to nothing. Life is nothing. This is why you fight in defense of ephemeral whispers who were dead the instant they were born, trapped in meaningless lives with inevitable ends whose echoes fade and leave only silence. It is dark, but it's also fascinating at the same time because none of it's true, right? I mean, sure, every human being born into the world will inevitably die. That's the nature of the world in which we live. But there's the 6 degrees of separation, right? You have, in some capacity, regardless of how large or small it has been, touched the life of another person. I mean, if I'm getting a little emotional here, as my fans, you guys have touched my life. I've touched you. And you have definitely touched me. No, it's true though, right? Like everybody touches the lives of everybody else in some capacity. And so sure, in the physical form in which we know them, hanging out with them, talking to them, laughing with them, that's not there anymore. The reality is that they, in some capacity, continue on with us. And with them, we in turn influence the lives of other people. So no one's ever truly gone, as cliche as it may sound. But the truth is that in this kind of situation, and what Peter Parker is experiencing here is, in a lot of ways, the pain of seeing so many people die. That people die every day in the world. People die in car crashes. People die in violent crimes that seem to make no sense whatsoever. You never knew their name. You never know their story, and you have no reason to think about them whatsoever. But what if you did? What if like that? Every single person who is currently dying right now in this moment, you not only were aware of the fact that they were dying, but you felt the pain of loss with their death. That would be like experiencing the worst death that you've ever experienced in your entire life, right? Losing the person closest to you in your whole life, multiplied by 1,000-fold, right? 1,000 times over at one time. It's an overwhelming sensation, and it breaks Peter, right? Because in some ways, it just calls into question everything. But despite all of that, and this is a testament to Peter as a character, despite all of that, he never lets go. He holds on to the sphere the entire time through all the pain and all the anguish, which surely you and I would have dropped that thing in an instant. Peter never does. He never lets it fall. And it drives Sarah nuts because she's like, no, like you're experiencing all this death and all this pain and all this anguish, but you still hold on. I absolutely hate you for this. Now, of course, the story kind of bounces back into cliches where you have Calix who shows up and he tries to attack Peter and so on and so forth. But Sarah's kind of touched by this. Peter's whole action here and holding on to the sphere, grieving the lives of people who were dying, people that he never knew. Right? But through it all, Peter held on. But the fact is that because he's broken in such a way, he's there, but he's not really there. And so ultimately he's beat to death by Calix and then wakes up in front of Phil Coulson. But that's when you get this kind of conversation between himself and the disembodied spirit of Doctor Strange, right? The one that's kind of guiding him through this entire trial. And Doctor Strange asks, how many did you get through before you died? And Doctor Strange says, 171,963 is my record. That's the number of deaths that I had to witness before I couldn't take it anymore. And he says, I couldn't warn you. And I'm sorry about that. Sarah's trial, it never changes. It's always the same. The others like to experiment, but you held on, right? You did it. You held on, Peter. And he says, 3 scions remain. And if you can believe it, they are worse than what you faced so far. And so in his conversation with Phil Coulson, Coulson says, you're more than halfway through Spider-Man, hang in there, right? Like you're going to be able to handle this. And so again, kind of switching back to Doctor Strange, he says, you've acquitted yourself well, but you need to redouble your efforts, Peter. The trials ahead require skill and imagination. And at that point, the breaking point of Peter has been reached. And he's like, why? And Doctor Strange is like, I don't really understand the question. And Peter's like, why do any of it? Right? Why does any of this matter? Right? It doesn't matter at all. And Doctor Strange says, Peter, what you saw, what you felt, I mean, I know it's a lot. And Peter's like, I mean, a lot. Okay, sure, whatever, man. Like, but Doctor Strange is like, but you know that people die. You're not naive. It's what we are. And Peter's like, exactly, right? Like what we are is meaningless. And so he's like, I'm sorry, man. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. I quit. I don't care. And Peter walks away. And so what you do is you pick up in the aftermath of this. Now, initially you kind of have the brother and sister who appear before, Cyttorak, whatever. But Sarah, fascinated by all of this, appears to Doctor Strange. And it's just kind of like, tell me about this guy, right? Like, this is so strange to me, right? It's so strange that this guy mourned, he grieved for the loss of people that he never met. And this challenge has really like fractured him on a personal level, broken him on a personal level, to the point where Peter walks into a store and while it's being robbed at gunpoint, he does nothing. Right? In fact, the only thing he really does is he addresses the criminal and he's like, how long did it take you to convince yourself that this was a good idea? And the guy's like, I mean, are you talking to me? And he's like, yeah, like I'm talking to you. You're going to get caught and you're going to go to jail for what? Like $64 in the register? No one even uses cash anymore. You're going to give up 5 years of your life and you can't even buy a video game. All this. And for what? A system that gives us a few billionaires and leaves everyone else squabbling for pennies. And then you die and your family has to have a bake sale to bury you. It's a broken world and a broken system. And the only way to win is to simply not play at all. Anyway, you should just leave it alone. Stop robbing people. And if you really need money, go apply at a grocery store or something. And the guy's kind of like, dude, are you off your rocker? But then like Bailey Briggs shows up, right? Spider-Boy, 10-year-old Spider-Man shows up here and basically takes the guy out. But then he addresses Peter directly and he's like, dude, what's your deal, man? Right? And Peter's just like, I'm fine, Spider-Boy, right? I'm just done lying to myself. It doesn't matter how hard you work. You can't change anything. And he's like, you're what? Like 8 years old, right? Like stop wasting your time with all this superhero nonsense. Go play tag or something, right? Like be a kid. And he's like, I'm 10 years old, man. And he's like, and just because you're sad doesn't mean that you can give up, right? Like you have to keep trying because things can get better and they do get better. And the response of Peter, sadly, they very much do not, right? But again, Doctor Strange and Sarah are watching this whole thing, watching all of this unfold. And so what ends up happening, right, in the aftermath of this is that Peter hits up his girl, right, who he'd effectively ghosted, right, like just kind of disappeared. Part of it was because he was in the trial, so he kind of had to just disappear and just kind of be very scant and very Superman Lois Lane-like in the early days, right, where he's just, oh my God, look at the time, I gotta go do anything other than be here, right, and then just like take off and go do his thing. But she's just like, what's your problem? Right? I mean, you ghosted me. You sent me a text out of nowhere that says you need help. Like, be lucky I even showed up here. And it's only because I'm a decent human being that I did. And so Peter's like, you're right. But I have a question. Like, it's something that's been bothering me and I have to ask you this question. And she's like, how do you do it? Right? Like, you're a nurse. You've lost so many people in your line of work. How do you do it when it all feels so pointless? And she responds with the best response imaginable. She says, here's the thing, right? I'd gotten close to a patient once, this girl named Elisa. She was super strong. She chose a life of crime, got caught. Also, she chose the life of a smoker. Finally, she stopped, but it was ultimately too late. We tried to fight it and we lost. It happens every day and it always hurts. But that time, I wanted to quit. I wanted to give up and I wanted to walk away. A day or two later, it hit me, right? It does happen every day. The death, the pain, it doesn't matter if I'm a nurse or a checkout lady at CVS, but I like being a nurse. I like helping people. There's a saying that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Find a professional to talk to and good luck. I hope that helps. And the reality and kind of what she's hitting at here, right, which is so important in all of this, is that yes, death is inevitable. It is inevitable that we are going to lose people. There's no getting around that, right? As Al Pacino said in Any Given Sunday, as you get older, things just get taken from you. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. There's nothing you can do to prevent it. No number of laws, no number of executive orders, no numbers of prayers and wishing and hoping can prevent random chance. And so because of that, all you can do is just live with the pain and do the best you can to process it, carry on the things you loved, and try to leave the things that you disliked behind. Now, if only it were so easy. Like, believe me, I'm still dealing with the grieving process myself. So if only it were so easy to simply just do that, right? To just kind of flick off and flick things on like a switch. And it's not, right? It's why living can be so hard. But the reality here and the suffering is optional aspect comes in the form of saying, yes, people are going to die all the time. And as a superhero, you can't save everybody, but you can take comfort in the fact that you saved who you could. Sure, that bus is about to go careening off the cliff, and maybe it does. You can only save one person in the bus, and the other however many die. A cynical person would tell you, well, you're no measure of a superhero at all because you lost the majority of the people who were there. But somebody who's a little more practical would say, yeah, but you could have lost everybody. You did what you could. And that's all any of us, you, I, or anybody, ever really can do. And so at this point, what you do is you switch over to the X-Men's headquarters in Alaska, which is kind of the main base of operations for what passes for the X-Men team in the aftermath of the fall of Krakoa. I don't say that cynically. The X-Men as a kind of team and the mutant kind of society of sorts has largely just been fractured. That's all taking place in Jed McKay's run in the X-Men comics, and you get Extraordinary X-Men and a few other things. I think Exceptional X-Men or whatever. But Juggernaut's kind of feeling the effect of what's going on, because keep in mind, Juggernaut is not really a child of Cyttorak, but he does get his power from Cyttorak. And seemingly he's aware of this, right? We don't know if something's different here or if Juggernaut experienced the same thing every time Doctor Strange was undergoing the trials against the children of Cyttorak. And so ultimately he kind of gathers together the X-Men and he's like, we need to go to New York, because if we don't get there right now, like the world's going to end, right? So this is fascinating, because at that point you pick up with Peter and you switch back over to his conversation with Felicia Hardy. And so as the two of them are kind of talking, she's like, so why are you lingering outside my apartment and out of costume? And Peter's like, because I'm trying to clap them cheeks. That's not true. But he's like, I saw you die, Felicia, right? Like I saw everyone die, every single person, and it did nothing. The world went on. And I just can't, right? I can't process this idea that all these superheroes, everybody that I know and love, dies, and the world just keeps on spinning. It doesn't stop, right? That is also one of the more difficult things. You lose somebody close to you, and most of the world would never know that it happened, right? They wouldn't even know that person existed. It's a very painful thing to have, because you almost want to scream to the world, why don't you care? Right? But it's a very painful thing to kind of contend with here. But she says, everyone dies, Spider, right? That's just how the story ends. You won the challenge though, right? And he's like, I mean, I didn't lose, but I lost. And he says, and I don't think there can be a win, like ever. You know, like Peter's wrestling with depression in the aftermath of what he experienced, right? And he's like, I just really can't keep doing it, like any of it, like the superhero stuff or the trials or anything, because none of it seems to matter. And so at that point, Felicia's like, and so you came here, why? Right? So is that why you're here, Peter? So you can just kind of emotionally dump, right? And complain about how unfair life is? Like, life isn't fair, Peter. That's the way the world works. You can't make life fair. That there are people who have and there are people who don't. There are people who win and there are people who lose. And that's the way that it is. You can try to make it fair in every way that you can, but the reality is that in this world, nothing will ever be laid out flat and even for everybody, everywhere, all the time. Someone is going to lose somewhere. So if you can't handle that, then get it together, right? Because Peter's just kind of sitting here and he's like, when we first met, you'd ask me why I did what I did. And I always had an answer, right? Sometimes I felt a little stupid and naive, even back then. I feel really stupid and naive now. And I don't really feel much of anything at the moment, if I'm being quite honest. She's like, Peter, you have to know that no matter how bad things get, there is still good in this world. That's the way the world is, right? I mean, there's good things here. It's not fair, it's not always right, but there is good. And our job as superheroes is to promote that good. And it's kind of the other half of the equation that Peter is forgetting about. Sure, as Spider-Man, he saves people from being robbed, or he makes life for criminals just hard, right? Or different things like that, which nobody would complain about. But the other thing that it does is it inspires people. It motivates people, right? People getting out there into the world and seeing that at least somebody's watching out for them makes them a little more inspired to help other people, right? That kind of thing. The world doesn't seem as dark and bleak, right, as it could be if there were no superheroes in the world whatsoever. And so kind of switching back to this conversation between Sarah and Dr. Strange, she says, I thought I understood you humans, but I judged all of them by you, and he is not like you. This new champion has shown me how little I understand. He seeks to find comfort in one whose loss will destroy him. It's a contradiction bereft of logic. And he says, that's humanity in a nutshell. And Peter is humanity. Like, we are oftentimes contradictory, right? But he asks, like, what did you do to him? And she says, nothing, right? Nothing that I didn't do to you, just more of it, right? Like, I just showed him more death than I showed you. And it's kind of nuts, right? Because Doctor Strange is like, how much more death did you show him? And she's like, well, I mean, the last time that you and I met, you endured 809,000 deaths. And he's like, and Peter, like, how many did he experience? And she's like, 3 million. And he didn't drop the sphere even once. And after breaking, he can't help but seek connection to other people. It's strange, and it doesn't make any sense to me. So again, it's fascinating, right? It's if anything, a testament to the nature of Peter to experience the raw, true emotion of the deaths of 3 million people in such rapid succession would break any human being. And it's no wonder Peter's struggling with depression and all these things that come out of it. But then at that point, Kratos shows up, the next scion of Cyttorak, because the battle goes on, the conflict continues. But when he shows up there in front of an old lady and her dog, he was like, you know, it is I, Kratos, prepared to meet your end, you miserable human. And it's just like this old woman, you know, and he's like, where is he? Where's the champion that's supposed to be here? But Peter's bailed out, and surely this old lady and her dog are going to fight this guy. But the Juggernaut shows up alongside the other X-Men, keeping in mind, we got Quentin Quire here, an Omega level telepath, and you got Magic, right? Not to say anything of Cyclops and Psylocke, right? You got super powerful characters here. And it's just like, prepare, right? Like, we X-Men accept your challenge. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. We will find out when issue number 67 comes out how this whole thing unfolds, because it's dope. I love it. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section, and I will catch you all later. Peace. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and this title is not clickbait. Spider-Man dies. So this is the 8 deaths of Spider-Man. And for those of you guys who need a little bit of catch up, because it's been a while since we've done it, in effect, the demon entity Cyttorak struck a bargain with Doctor Strange that for some reason that hadn't really been explained up to that point in time, the two of them entered into a kind of contest where seemingly over a period of time, for some number of years, that Doctor Strange would face off against the children of Cyttorak. If any one of them successfully killed Doctor Strange permanently, it would allow Cyttorak to invade Earth. Now, most of you guys are aware of Cyttorak because he's the guy that gives Juggernaut his power. He's incredibly powerful. So literally, this game is the only thing that prevents the end of all things on Earth, because if Cyttorak were to show up on Earth, outside of the highest level reality warpers, and depending on how the story's written, nobody would be able to stop him. Well, when Doctor Doom took the power of Doctor Strange and kind of set the Marvel Universe on the path of one world under Doom, Doom basically had more important things to do. Quite literally. So he just passed this on to Spider-Man, and now Spider-Man fights as the champion of Earth against the children of Cyttorak. Each one of these kids has a power of their own, and these powers vary from super strength to super speed, the ability to manipulate dimensions, and so on and so forth. In the last video that we did, Syra had basically shown Spider-Man all the ways in which everybody that he had ever known would die, right? And seemingly everybody on Earth die in just a variety of ways. And so Spider-Man just kind of lost hope in what it meant to be a superhero and effectively walked away. And that's where this opens up, because Juggernaut, picking up on the fact that like the children of Cyttorak are showing up here during this contest, ends up leading the X-Men in the fight against the children of Cyttorak, even if only for a moment. Now, the X-Men do what they can, and they hold themselves pretty well. But keep in mind, this is a child of an astronomically powerful demon entity. And so that's the reason why, despite some incredibly powerful mutants who are here, Psylocke, Magic, Quentin Quire, also known as Kid Omega, some of these being Omega level mutants, cannot quite keep this guy down. They just don't necessarily have the power to do it. But it all comes down to Juggernaut. Now, again, this story does kind of cook the books a little bit, if we're being honest with ourselves, but it's also a really cool fight between the two, because while this whole thing goes down, Cyttorak watches this fight unfold, and Cyttorak's kind of fascinated by this whole thing. Remember, Spider-Man's given up. The champion quit. So technically speaking, Cyttorak does have the right to invade if he chooses to, but seeing the conflict is more interesting than anything else, especially with Kane Marco just beating the crap out of his son. But at the same time, Cain Marko is getting the crap beat out of him. This is literally a battle of juggernauts, essentially. And so after that, Doctor Strange ends up going to visit Peter Parker, who's just kind of drinking a cup of coffee and doesn't really care about anything. And that's what's so wild about this, is because, remember, Peter's just sort of like, what's the point, right? I mean, an important distinction to understand here, Peter is not somehow like descended into depression, right? He's not just like sitting around all day moping, crying, listening to, I don't know, some sad emo music like Evanescence and just, writing in a journal about how terrible life is. That's not really what he's doing. Right? He's just sort of like, I mean, what's the point, right? Like, who cares? Because from his perspective, the idea is like, sure, they save humanity from a threat and a worse threat comes along. So what's the point? Right? I mean, why keep fighting this nonsensical battle? And on some level, Doctor Strange understands it, but that's not really the way the world works. I mean, sure, like the world presents you with challenges all the time. But for us as people, while those challenges can be exhausting, they can also be incredibly rewarding when they're overcome. And it's not as though Peter's hit with challenge after challenge after challenge after challenge nonstop 100% of the time. This situation is really an exception to the rule as opposed to the rule itself. He's inside his own head. He's gotten into his own head, so he can't really see the forest for the trees. He doesn't really realize that it's an exception to the rule and not the rule itself. And so he's just not thinking clearly, essentially. And so while all that goes on, you then switch over to Calix, the brother of Syra, the last champion to fight Spider-Man, and the one that Spider-Man absolutely crushed. But as this fight is taking place between the two of them, suddenly Calix starts to kind of change his physical appearance and almost sort of succumb to a power that's not his own. Now, here's where things get kind of wild here. Here's where things get murky. And I don't know what's going on. I mean, it is explained, right? It's basically something called a blight. We'll talk about that here in a second. But there's the diamond on his head, and his skin turns white. He looks like Sinister, right? Technically, Sinister does not have a diamond on his neck, but it looks like Sinister, right? Now, again, these are all things that he had anyway, right? Which is to say, he already had the diamond on his head. He already had the diamond on his neck, right? These things were already there. So I don't know if Marvel's toying with something here. Maybe I'm just sort of looking a little too deep into something that doesn't matter. I'm not really sure. But that's when you switch back over to the story that Doctor Strange tells Peter Parker, where he says, when I first encountered the blight, it nearly destroyed me. I was younger then. The secrets of the universe were revealed to me, and I was filled with wonder and awe, but was still not ready for the cosmic energy known as the blight. I studied it because that is who I am. But the more I learned, the more I realized that it was a threat to Earth and everything I hold dear. I tried to destroy it, but it was a wasted effort. The blight is eternal. It is a force of nature, as inexorable as solar flares or death. It exists to extinguish life. If it were to perceive humanity, it would be our end. Now, here's the crazy thing about this. Marvel does this from time to time. They introduce like a new cosmic entity, or they change up some aspect of the Marvel cosmology to add in a new level of power that didn't exist before. A good example of this is like the Black Winter and Thor's hammer, right? For years and years and years, only the worthy could lift Thor's hammer. It didn't have to necessarily be a good guy. All a person had to do was be worthy, because the inscription said, whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. It never said anything about whosoever holds this hammer, if they be a good guy, shall possess the power of Thor. That was never part of the inscription. Right? People just kind of tricked themselves into believing that over the years in Marvel Comics. But when it came to Jason Aaron's run and Donny Cates' runs, it introduced this idea that inside the hammer was a cosmic storm that had been tamed by Odin. And the storm trapped in the hammer was actually the determining factor of who got to wield the hammer and who didn't. But then it was also the same thing with the Black Winter, right? That at the beginning of Donny Cates' run, that Galactus shows up to Asgard unceremoniously, literally crashing into Asgard and saying like he needs Thor's help in order to defeat a greater foe, which turns out to be the Black Winter. In the same way that Galactus travels the cosmos and consumes planets, the Black Winter travels the multiverse and consumes universes. And it actually consumed the DC universe. Literally, it's the DC superheroes that were consumed by the Black Winter. It was kind of hilarious. But the bigger point here is this. The introduction of the blight as this kind of antithesis to existence, it's not the first time that's happened. And in fact, one of the things that Doctor Strange says here is he says, I searched for a way to destroy the blight. through this reality and others, you cannot even begin to imagine there was only one option, the spell for the casket. I rejected that solution at first, but eventually I did the unthinkable. I made the bargain with Cyttorak that resulted in the Covenant. The casket is the only thing keeping the Blight from perceiving the earth and raining misery down upon us all. Now, again, this is another example of uncharted waters, right? The casket of Cyttorak is something that we just haven't seen before. We don't really know anything about it. So again, this is all new stuff. But Doctor Strange goes on and he says, the Blight seeks to prune life and does so through an affliction known as soul rot and endless torture where living things seek out the things they love the most and they destroy them. And he says, Peter, there are things worse than death. Soul rot and the chaos the Blight would wreak on Earth are among them. And the response of Peter is, look, I get what you're saying, man, but like, why does it matter, right? Because even if we defeat this Blight that you're talking about, something worse is going to come along. And that's where Doctor Strange is like, dude, you have to snap out of it, man. Like, dude, I get where you're at. I get that you're struggling, but we are all the captains of our own ship, right? Like, you are the guy who saves people. You're the guy who saves yourself. You need to save yourself here, right? I mean, that's a real life lesson, right? That is a real lesson to have here. And ultimately, Spider-Man's just like, I wish you and the X-Men all the luck in the world. And so ultimately, he's actually joined by Kyra herself, or Syra, or Syrah, or whatever, however you want to pronounce it. We'll pronounce it different times, different ways over the course of the video. But the thing about this is that she actually tells Peter, I have been watching you this entire time, and you're fascinating. Right? You went from being what is arguably the most hopeful hero to being the most melancholy hero. And she's like, I watch your city, right? I watch your people, and I watch my brother and those who foolishly take up your quest. I watch all of this. Now, there is a point where this actually leads, it kind of jumps back to the momentary fight between Juggernaut and the child of Cyttorak. And Juggernaut actually gets the upper hand, right? He forces the guy to yield. Now, there does seem to be a kind of caveat here in the sense that the Juggernaut makes this statement where he says the X-Men are now Earth's champions, right? Kind of taking the place of Spider-Man. So we don't necessarily know if within the Covenant of Doctor Strange and Cyttorak, if that is an adequate stand-in for a champion, so long as someone takes up the mantle, or if that champion has to be decreed by the Sorcerer Supreme, whoever the Sorcerer Supreme may be. But it does stand to reason that if someone other than Doctor Strange can be Sorcerer Supreme and then designate a champion to protect the world and the Covenant stays intact, that someone other than the designated champion can become the new champion to fight on Earth's behalf. So again, it seems like it works, right, for the most part, because ultimately, like, this guy yields, and this leads to Calix stepping in and punching a hole through this champion, and then in turn, attacking the X-Men. Now, here's the crazy thing about this is that this guy Calix, with this new power, right, basically soul rot, channeling the power of the Blight, literally brings the Juggernaut to a standstill like that. There's this point where the Juggernaut comes running up on him, right? And he's just like, all right, man, let's have this fight too, right? If this is another child of Cyttorak here, then let's have this fight. And ultimately, like, Calix just sticks his hand out and just stops the Juggernaut dead in his tracks with the greatest of effort. He's like, my father sees fit to bestow his gifts on everyone but me, but I have something better now. And just like sends the Juggernaut flying, which is amazing. You've only ever seen that a couple times in Marvel Comics. Back in the 90s, you saw Onslaught do it indirectly when he punched Juggernaut across the world. That was nuts. Or maybe it was just across North America. It was a huge punch, right? It was nuts. Juggernaut like lands on the grounds of like the X-Men Institute, and the X-Men are like, what in the world is going on here? And he's just like, Onslaught's coming, and it's just like, bro. And then you saw it with the Incredible Hulk becoming, the Horseman of War during the Peter David run, I'm pretty sure. It was really, really cool, right? It was just one of these cool things that happens where you see Juggernaut just get shut down from time to time. But then, like, Syrah starts crying and watching all of this, right? Because literally Calix just starts unleashing these hounds across the world. And she's just like, this is it, man. Like, my brother is officially gone. And that's where she kind of picks up where where Doctor Strange left off and explaining things to Peter. That Peter's just sort of like, look, thanks for the cat, but like, if there's somewhere you need to be, like, I don't want to do any of this. And she's like, nope, I don't need to be anywhere. You do, right? Like, it's time for you to stop moping, home slice. Let's get back into it. So she just like snatches up Peter Parker and just like takes him outside. It's like, quit being a punk. Like, look at what's going on out here, right? And she's like, get it together. And so at that point, he's just like, wow, right? It's just this great big huge fight. And everyone here is dead, right? They're all dead. Like these innocent people, well, maybe not everybody, the X-Men are still fighting, but like these innocent people are all dead. And so at that point, it's like people he knows, right? People who were close friends. And so of course, Phil Coulson appears. Now, for those of you guys who have not been following Marvel Comics well, maybe you have, but you haven't really been following Phil Coulson. Phil Coulson is now the new Death in Marvel Comics, mostly because Thanos basically took Mistress Death and turned her into an Infinity Stone. So she's not really around anymore. I mean, she is, but she's just like a ball hanging out with Thanos. And so like Phil Coulson is the new guy, right? Like he's the guy that literally whisks people off to the afterlife, which is kind of a cool way to bring his character back, to be honest. And so one of the things that went on here, right, part of the bargain when it came to being Earth's champion during the Covenant of Cyttorak is Peter Parker was given what were called reeds. And every time he died, he could cash in this reed, and this reed would bring him back from the land of the dead, right? Phil Coulson would literally resurrect him from death. And so at that point, Peter seeing all these people here, he tells Phil Coulson, he's like, look, I will give you the last of my reeds, but bring them back and make sure they don't remember how they died. But Phil Coulson warns him. He says, look, man, if you do this, right, these reeds are how you return. If you hand these reeds over, if you die, there is no coming back. It's a permanent death. And so at that point, Peter's just like, that's a risk I'm willing to take. And he just hands the reeds over to Coulson and then jumps back into the fight again. Now, he does team up with the X-Men and he does team up with Kyra. This is cool. And like when this happens, initially they're like, okay, Kyra tells him there's something different here, right? It's not just my brother channeling the power of Cyttorak. He's channeled by something else. I've heard it called soul rot, the blight. I honestly don't know a whole lot about it. Not even Spider-Man knows that much about it. And I would even go so far as to say, outside of like his initial encounter with it, Doctor Strange probably doesn't even know that much about it. So it is very much an ambiguous force out there, and it can't just be defeated easily. But at the end of the day, despite the fact that Calyx is incredibly powerful, he is a avatar of the Blight. So in the same way that like Null the symbiote god is an avatar or a facsimile of the cosmic entity Oblivion, it's not the same as being the cosmic entity Oblivion. And so basically Calyx can be defeated. It's just a matter of figuring out how, because at this point he's crushed everybody, because in that moment he seizes control of Cyclops and he was like, you Earthers truly don't know when to give up. And so when that happens, this leads to Cyclops initially being thrown aside, jumping back into the fray with the rest of the X-Men, Juggernaut, and Spider-Man, and then going to face off against Calyx. But nothing they do matters. And Spider-Man even channels this spell called the Infernal Spear of Ferrocle, which, as Doctor Strange had explained to him, it was kind of a last-ditch effort spell. It will essentially destroy anybody that it's used against, even a scion of Cyttorak, a child of Cyttorak. But at the end of the day, it has no effect. And Calyx tells him, you have not been paying attention. Scions are your superiors, and the Blight makes me their superior in every way. Literally, your spell's not powerful enough to work on me. And so in that moment, he just kind of like sends his hounds out there, and the hounds start attacking the various X-Men. And then Calyx teleports away and destroys the hounds. But that's not really what was actually going on. The hounds were a transmission system, because at that moment, Cyclops attacks Juggernaut, and then the X-Men start attacking each other, and everybody in the city starts attacking each other. And that's where Kyra literally transports Spider-Man to a place in between dimensions, right? Where they're there, but they're not there. They're kind of out of phase with reality. So everything kind of looks, black and white and all that kind of stuff. But she's just like, so the dogs were a transmission system. Everybody out here is infected with a blight now, right? They're all going to destroy each other unless we find a way to defeat Calyx. Everyone you know and love across the world is going to succumb to this, right? This is how soul rot works. It spreads from one person to the next. And so ultimately what you end up having her do is she says, okay, the only way for us to seemingly be able to pull this off, we have to recruit my father. We have to go to the Crimson Dimension. So they jump there, right, to where Cyttorak is, and all of her brothers and sisters are dead, right? Every single one of them were killed. All of them having been killed by Calyx. And then at that point, Cyttorak's just kind of on the chair watching it all unfold. And at that moment, Kyra is almost kind of like disenchanted with her father. She was like, why did you allow him to do this, right? Like, why would he do this? Like, father's a warrior, right? He would fight infinitely against whatever odds. Now, that is one of the funny things about Marvel and the power of Cyttorak. Cyttorak's power has been provided to us and really shown to us in a variety of different ways. Juggernaut becoming a harbinger for Cyttorak's power, Colossus becoming the new Juggernaut in Marvel Comics, or at least he did for a period of time during Fear itself, and then a little while after Fear itself. That we've seen Doctor Strange channel the Crimson Bands of Cyttorak, right, in Marvel. And so we've seen like a variety of these little things here and there. But very rarely do you ever actually see Cyttorak as a demon entity pick up a sword and get into a fight. The closest that we ever saw to that was the 8th Day storyline and the story of the Octessence, the kind of battle between Cyttorak and the other 8 demon entities that at one point had a bargain on Earth to kind of create the most powerful avatar and so on and so forth. But the fact is, at the end of all of this, Kyra's like, okay, I'm going to go after my brother. You need to figure out a way to like get Cyttorak out of what it is that he's doing right now, right? Wake him up or kind of rally him, however it is that it needs to be done. Get this guy into the fight. And so what ends up happening is that as Spider-Man is trying to rouse Cyttorak from whatever's going on, a portal opens over his head and the blight comes out. And here's the kind of crazy thing about this. Those of you guys who are fans of DC Comics and Green Lantern, it looks a lot like Parallax. It looks very, very similar to Parallax, the living embodiment of fear. And so when that happens, you suddenly have Calyx, who appears behind Spider-Man. Now, Spider-Man's kind of musing to himself at that point. He says, how can we fight something so massive and so powerful? Like, this is beyond anything I could ever understand. And the response of Calyx is, you don't, right? Know this with your last breath. My triumph will be complete. And he snaps the neck of Spider-Man and throws him on the ground. And just to kind of add a little bit of peppering on top, right, to verify this, Phil Coulson appears in front of Spider-Man and says, you did your best, kid. It's time to go. Because Spider-Man is officially dead in Marvel Comics. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Do you think it's permanent? Do you think it's one of these things where Marvel's going to do it short term? Of course he's going to come back. Spider-Man's too popular to kill. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace. Who's the bigger fool? Marvel for pretending to kill Spider-Man, or me for believing it? But Spider-Man does become a god, so this is going to be a really cool ending to this story. But what this does is this continues the whole thing about the 8 deaths of Spider-Man. And like we mentioned, at the end of the last video, it looked like Spider-Man was actually dead, and technically he was killed. He is officially dead in Marvel Comics. But we also got kind of an expansion on what was actually going on. That what we initially thought was happening was that there was just kind of a bargain, right? A wager that was struck between Cyttorak and Doctor Strange. Cyttorak wants to invade Earth. Doctor Strange, of course, doesn't want to allow that to happen. And so the bargain that was struck between the two of them was that Doctor Strange every year would fight the children of Cyttorak. And if at any point one of the children successfully killed Doctor Strange, that would allow Cyttorak to invade the main Marvel universe. As most of you guys know, that never really seemed to happen. Kind of an aside here, a lot of you guys were asking in the comments how powerful Cyttorak is. Just as an indication, just to kind of demonstrate how capable this guy is in relation to other people, because he doesn't really cross over with the main Marvel universe all that much. In Doctor Strange Sorcerer Supreme number 44, he pulled Galactus into his own realm and overpowered him. So yeah, Cyttorak is incredibly powerful in Marvel Comics. He's immensely powerful. But what we ended up learning, right, focusing on this story, what we ended up learning is that the wager between the two was much bigger than that. That what was actually happening here was that Cyttorak was kind of a block for the Blight, in the same way that at one point, Galactus was the gatekeeper for Abraxas. If Galactus dies, Abraxas is unleashed and just starts wreaking havoc across the multiverse. The same thing here, that when it came to Cyttorak, if the wager was lost and the champion died, it wasn't really Cyttorak invading the universe, it was opening the door for the Blight to enter. Now again, the Blight is very ambiguous in Marvel Comics. The nature of it, its existence really, was just revealed to us in the last issue. And because it is a character that's kind of introduced within the context of this story, I don't imagine that we'll really see anything else from it again. All we really know is the Blight is just kind of like this multiversal force of negative energy, for lack of a better word. Soul rot, as they call it, right? It infects an individual and it just kind of twists them into an evil version of themselves, right? And so all this was basically enabled by Calyx, the son of of Cyttorak, or one of Cyttorak's sons. Just kind of a quick little thing here. Calix is the son who's pissed because his dad just doesn't really give him enough attention, and like he just doesn't really feel like he gets respect from his dad. So like he just wants to prove how capable he is, and then ultimately became infected by the Blight itself. It's the Blight's avatar on Earth, and then essentially is just kind of like allowing the Blight to enter is really all it is, right? So at the end of the day, you have Kyra, who's kind of standing over Spider-Man, right? She's one of the Scions. She was originally going to just like fight Spider-Man and be the one to kill him or whatever, but for some reason that she hasn't fully been able to understand, her tune has changed. She's no longer this person, this Scion, who's just like Spider-Man is a guy that I have to defeat, and she believes wholeheartedly in the idea of her father and the death of the champion and so on and so forth. She doesn't really understand what's going on. And so while Calix just, kind of teases her a little bit and is like, yes, the end is nigh, yada, yada, you are not the sister that I knew, and so on and so forth. Phil Coulson is here. Now remember, Phil Coulson is basically the avatar of death, right? There's no more Mistress Death. She's an Infinity Stone hanging out with Thanos. Now Phil Coulson is death. And this is this kind of statement that he makes, where he's watching Calix and Kyra go back and forth. And he says, it's a little late to discover your capacity to care about people, Kyra, Scion of Cyttorak. Late for Spider-Man, at least. So if you'll excuse me, I have to get to work. And he's like, thanks to your brother, I'm about to be very, very busy. And that's where she says, honored avatar of death, I know that you must carry on with your grim work, but this is all wrong. Cyttorak is the most powerful of the quintessence. And even if Strange speaks true and Cyttorak did not know of the Blight, my father yields to no one and no thing. Why does he not fight back against my brother? And that's where Phil asks her, like, is that what you're really asking? Or is something else bothering you? And so you kind of get this really interesting moment because you switch over to Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom for a second, right? Yes, Doctor Strange is in his non-corporeal form, his spirit form. Yes, Doctor Doom is a Sorcerer Supreme because Doctor Doom basically stole the power of Doctor Strange and Doctor Strange is dead. For those of you guys who are familiar with Doctor Strange and Marvel Comics, whenever Marvel wants to take his powers away and make someone else the Sorcerer Supreme, they kill him. And his powers become somebody else's for a temporary period of time. And then because it's magic, right? It's Marvel's version of the Speed Force from DC Comics. You don't got to explain it. It's just stuff that happens. That Doctor Strange ends up regaining his powers. I mean, truth to tell, I'm being a little glib, but like, that's really how it works in Marvel. They kill Stephen Strange. His powers go to usually whoever it was that killed him or some good guy. They get to be Sorcerer Supreme for a little while. The powers are handed back over and Stephen Strange regains his physical form. It's kind of been his MO for the last few years in Marvel Comics, a way for Marvel to kind of keep his character somewhat interesting and relevant. And so that's why he's here and he's chastising Doctor Doom, because what he says is, you're acting like a teenager, right? You want all the benefits of adulthood with none of the responsibility. And that's not how this works. When you took my mantle as Sorcerer Supreme and all the power that came with it, you also took all the responsibility that came with it. All the tasks of making sure that the various dimensions across the universe don't invade each other and things don't go sideways. Because if two dimensions out there in the universe go to war against each other, that war can impact us on Earth. So you have to keep an eye on all those things. But it also means this covenant with Cyttorak was your covenant as well. It was your whole deal. The entire idea was that you would be the one to face off against the children of Cyttorak and you would stave off impending doom. But you chose not to. You took the easy way out. You didn't think it was important enough. You handed it off to Spider-Man and said, you're my champion now, and just thrust him into this impossible situation that he had no idea how to understand. And while Stephen Strange tried to guide him as best as he could, at the end of the day, he couldn't prepare Spider-Man for everything. Because while Stephen Strange has fought these different champions consistently, it's a whole different beast when they're fighting someone else because their tactics change. The strategies they use change. So the best that Doctor Strange can say is, hey, this guy is most likely going to come at you this way, but he came at me that way. So I don't know exactly how he's going to come at you. Right. And so where he's chastising Doctor Doom this whole time, as you guys know, Doctor Doom doesn't take lip off of anybody. So he immediately blasts Doctor Strange and is like, do not question your betters. And so at that point, you switch back over to Calix, Cyttorak, Kyra, or Sire, however you want to pronounce it, and Spider-Man and Phil Coulson. And the conversation between Phil Coulson's death and Kyra herself is he says, Cyttorak sat in his throne immovable. Your brother lusted for power that he'd never have. The covenant, game or not, began as it had many times before. And he says, and you didn't care about any of it until you did. And that's where she says, until Spider-Man endured the deaths that I showed him. And Phil Coulson says, wrong, but you're so close. He felt them, he carried them, not the deaths. And that's where it hits to her. She says, the lives. And Phil Coulson says, you and your father are essentially immortal. You see curvature of the horizon of time. From that detached point of view, it's easy to believe that nothing matters, which is a true statement, right? There is such a thing as being so far removed from the goings on in the world that you forget what actually matters in the world. And you forget the degrees of separation that people have, right? The idea of 6 degrees of separation, you're only ever 6 people away from everybody on Earth. You pass a guy at the airport, that guy passes somebody else, they pass somebody else. You get to the 5th person who works with the 6th person in a building, and you're 6 degrees separated from like some prime minister somewhere, or some king, and there are some super rich person in the Saudi family. So we're only ever 6 degrees disconnected, which is a pretty incredible concept when you think about it. But when you're someone like Cyttorak, and really even his children, who are effectively immortal, what initially starts off as a kind of fascination with humanity and its very nature turns into boredom, because you do kind of start to see certain patterns among people, and the more bored you become, the more detached you become, and the less concerned you become with the value of life. And that's why Phil Coulson says, one day an insignificant player entered your game, and your perspective shifted. Your eyes fell from the endless horizon and land squarely in the now. What's happening now? And she says, Cyttorak is not immovable. He's paralyzed by loss. And that's where she says, but he can't feel loss. And that's where Phil Coulson's like, now you're figuring it out. And she's like, unless he feels love. Now, this is going to be a very contested point among Marvel comic fans who are huge fans of Cyttorak. And the reason for that is because historically speaking in Marvel, right, if you look at the old Doctor Strange, Sorcerer Supreme comics, the old X-Men comics, even stories like Fear itself, that Cyttorak is portrayed really in only one way, especially when you look at stories like the 8th Day event, right, where you get like 8th Day Juggernaut, things like that. Cyttorak is an incredibly powerful god of the highest order, and he's right up there with guys like Dormammu and Chthon and so on and so forth in varying ways, right? It's not an absolute even field. It's not linear, right? It shifts around. But at the end of the day, he's always kind of been portrayed as this incredibly, I don't know if I would say evil, more like a malevolent force, and also detached force. And so it's one of these things where he can be angry and he can get jealous. A good example of this is during the story of Fear itself, when Cain Marko became a herald for the serpent, the brother of Odin, and that he effectively took on an additional god's power in addition to the power that he had. And this led to Cyttorak basically taking the power of the Juggernaut away from Cain Marko and giving it to Colossus. And so that's how basically you got Unstoppable Colossus in Marvel. Yes, we cover that story. I know a lot of you guys are new comic book readers and you probably don't even know who I am. But yes, we covered that story like 7 years ago on the channel. We've been doing this for so long. And so the idea of Marvel suddenly coming along and saying, actually, Cyttorak is this being that feels the love of a parent like anybody else, the love of a friend, that he's more of a kind and compassionate being, not wholly evil, that's going to rub some people the wrong way. Because truth to tell, I think it's a lot more interesting when Cyttorak is just this dark, brooding, evil type of malevolent dude, because it gives you this sort of feeling that like, if he were to ever invade Earth, he's not going to have like a great big huge cookout for the superheroes. Hey guys, it's me, Cyttorak. Let's all have a barbecue at my place. Bring the beers. I'll bring the food. We'll have a great time. No. Cyttorak's going to show up on Earth and everyone is going to die. Right? It's just one of those things. It makes the character a lot more interesting, and it makes the gravitas of his appearances far more significant. But it all kind of depends on how you feel about all this. And so at the end of the day, that's what Phil Coulson tells her, right? That's what your father is feeling. It's what you are feeling. You're feeling the experience of love. And Spider-Man is the reason why, right? But the idea here is that this love is not just predicated on like the value of life and the sanctity of life and things like that, but it's the value of what it means to live a life and to be willing to sacrifice your life for the benefit of others. And so it literally changes this girl's mind. And she's like, I want to strike a bargain. And that's where Phil Coulson is like, I mean, death can't really bargain, which is true. Historically speaking, with the exception of some very small exceptions, basically Deadpool and Thanos, Mistress Death historically did not bargain. When it came to your time, right, when it was your time to go, it was your time to go. And she would drag you in to the realm of death, kicking and screaming if she had to. But one way or another, it was curtains. Your time was up. And so you never really had any kind of bargaining power there. It's just the way things were. But in this instance, Phil Coulson is a little bit different and functions a little bit different. I wouldn't go so far as to say that he was willing to bend and break the rules, but I will say that in this particular instance, she makes a good point, and she's like, okay, death can be staved off. Reeds, magic, a trade, the power and immortality of a scion of Cyttorak to restore one indomitable human spirit. I will give you my immortality if you will bring Spider-Man back. And that's where he says, okay, I mean, okay, yeah, all right, we could kind of fudge the numbers a bit, right? Strange's use of the reeds was unorthodox, but there was precedent for the pact with Ragador. It was basically a giant screw you to, from one god to another. So basically it's his way of saying, all right, we can kind of shift these things around a little bit and we can do it once, right? And so the question is, when she asks, can you do it? He asks, can you? Because what you're doing is you're giving up the entire life you've known up to this point, this massive sacrifice that you're making that the world will never really ever understand. Even Peter Parker will never truly understand it, which is true, right? You can't truly understand the depths of a sacrifice if you can't understand what it means to have had that and then sacrifice it in the first place. And so for someone like Peter Parker, he's never known immortality. So for him, he has no idea what it means to sacrifice immortality. It does not mean that he cannot be grateful, that he cannot be thankful. And he certainly is, because she says, do it, right? Like, I will give up my immortality, take it. And so at the end of the day, he does, right? He says, name, Benjamin Parker, cause of life, the willing transfer of crimson essence from the offspring of the god Cyttorak to the subject's mortal form. Immortality traded for the remaining days of one mortal life. The universe screams, this is not the order of things. Generally, the universe would be right. But I'm new to the job. Surely I'm allowed to make a mistake in the name of love. Not for this girl and not for Peter and not for mine, but Spider-Man's love for everyone. And so literally, Spider-Man pops back up. Now, this is where things get dope, because Spider-Man shows up here in just kind of his spiritual form, right? He's like, thank you doesn't really seem to be big enough and that kind of thing, and she's like, look, you don't need to thank me. You don't need to do anything. She's like, you simply just need to become, right? Become a weapon and shed the role of a pawn. Now, the whole time she's saying this, right, Catlix, the son of Cyttorak, is like attacking his father, who's just paralyzed by the feeling of love, something that he's never felt before. And so, like, literally his son Calyx is like, it's my time, right? Like, I will destroy you, I will take your role, and I will literally become the blight in this universe. But the whole time, right, Kyra's talking to Spider-Man, and she's like, become strength incarnate. And she's like, become unstoppable, because Spider-Man becomes the Juggernaut. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Dude, it's nuts. Good thing these comics come out weekly, because next week we pick up with what I think is the ending of all of this. It's dope. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the amazing Spider-Man, and he literally becomes Juggernaut in this story. Probably the most overpowered version of Spider-Man of all time,
with the exception of Captain Universe Spider-Man. But this picks up, of course, in the aftermath of the last issue that we covered. And a little bit of a refresher here, as always, there'll be a playlist at the end of the video if you need to get caught up. That what happened here is that Spider-Man is battling a guy called Calyx. Essentially, he has what's called the Rot, which is essentially a kind of cosmic force that corrupts the souls of everybody that it comes across. The only way for Spider-Man to be able to defeat Calyx is to take on the power of the Juggernaut given directly to him by the daughter of Cyttorak, the person who traditionally gives Juggernaut his powers. Cyttorak, of course, being that person. And so this picks up in the immediate aftermath or the immediate conflict of that whole event. And what's interesting about this is that you have Doctor Strange and you have Doctor Doom who are watching all of this unfold. And while Doctor Doom is the new Sorcerer Supreme, and he's the one that set Spider-Man on this path, there is actually a bigger game afoot for the character of Doctor Doom himself. And Stephen Strange does not immediately figure it out, but figures it out later on down the line. Now, we'll get to that point here in a little bit, but initially, you pick up with Spider-Man and Juggernaut. Now, Kane Marco is well versed in having these powers. He knows what the power of the Juggernaut comes with. He knows what he's capable of. This is all new to Spider-Man. Now, it is cool to see Spider-Man and Juggernaut teaming up with each other, but this is all new to Peter Parker. And so that's why, as the two of them are having a bit of a conversation here, that initially Spider-Man wants to stay there and help everybody face off against all these individuals that are essentially possessed by the Rot. Because up until that point, when Calyx was kind of momentarily knocked out, that you had the X-Men fighting each other, right? They were all corrupted and twisted and so on and so forth. With them being back to normal, now the attention focuses on everybody else who's infected as well, keeping civilians from harming each other. But the funny thing about this is Juggernaut's smart enough to know that's where the main fight is. That's the guy you need to go contend with. And so what he does is he throws a fastball special. And it's cool because Spider-Man has never had this really done with him before. The fastball special, of course, as most of you guys know, is where Colossus throws Wolverine at a target. It's been a thing for the longest time, and fans absolutely love it. So seeing the Juggernaut pick up Spider-Man and just throw him like a bullet directly at Calyx is kind of awesome. But again, with Spider-Man wanting to stay here and wanting to deal with all of this, Juggernaut says, no, you need to go deal with Calyx. That's where the real fight is. This is your fight. You've got to contend with it. Now, the reality here, and something that a lot of you guys probably picked up pretty quickly, is that if Calyx really is possessed by this kind of living embodiment of entropy, right, a being that imbues the very essence of corruption throughout the entirety of the universe, how in the world could Spider-Man beat a guy like that? Because when it comes to entities on that level, you can't really defeat him with like punches or anything along those lines. It takes incredible amounts of energy and reality warpers only on the highest level to even stand a chance here. And so where Juggernaut walks off, Spider-Man kind of muses to himself for a second, right? And he says, the Juggernaut's footfalls are all I hear for a second, matching my heartbeat, the world slows. And I realize the big lug is right. I've done enough thinking. I know what the solution is. Nothing else matters. And so that's why he kind of prepares to make this final sacrifice, right? He says, this was a good life once more from the chest, and just fires up, right? Literally just lunges using a magic spell that sends him directly up to Calyx. Now, at that moment, Doctor Strange starts to realize what's going on. Number one, yes, Calyx is possessed, but technically the fight is directly with the Blight itself. The Blight basically being this kind of cosmic energy that creates the Rot, that instills it in people, and is the one that directly corrupts people, and it's the one that directly corrupted Calyx. But Doctor Strange comments, he says he knows that striking the Blight is only a temporary reprieve. Without Cyttorak himself, the only way to recast the casket, and that's when he starts to pick up the pieces. Now again, the casket was kind of like a dimensional barrier. It's what kept the Blight from entering into the universe. But when the Blight finally possessed Calyx, the son of Cyttorak, and the Blight entered into the universe itself, Cyttorak, for the first time in his existence, felt grief. And having experienced an emotion that he'd never felt before, he was literally paralyzed by it. He didn't really know how to process it or how to handle it. And so Doctor Strange watching all of this unfold is like, that's why you chose Spider-Man, right? When you became Sorcerer Supreme, this was supposed to be your fight. You were the one that was supposed to be facing off against the children of Cyttorak in order to
prevent the blight from entering into this reality. But when you abdicated that responsibility and you gave it to Spider-Man, Spider-Man did what he could, but at the end of the day, he could not stop the blight from entering. But you chose him because you knew of all the superheroes on Earth, he's the only one that wouldn't give up. And that's the nature of Peter, right? Peter's entire existence is, in truth, a pretty sad one, right? If you scale out from any one particular story in Spider-Man and you look at his entire history, he lost his uncle, he lost Aunt May a couple times, he lost his marriage to Mary Jane Watson. In fact, he had to sacrifice it. He lost his body and his entire spiritual essence to Dr. Octopus at one point in time. The guy's entire life has been nothing more than facing some of the most bleak circumstances, but always coming back from it. And so what you do is you switch over to the Crimson Cosmos, where the daughter of Cyttorak is talking to him directly. And what's really interesting is she says, it's quiet. If it was not so terrible, it would be nice, but we must scare the quiet away with truth, Father. I have traded my immortality, my share of your crimson magics, to spare the life of the mortal champion so that he can save the Earth realm, including you. And again, Cyttorak, never having encountered these things before, just asks, why, right? Why am I immobilized, indecisive, confused? And again, when it comes to Cyttorak as a being in Marvel Comics, you don't really see a whole lot of him, shy of a few stories where he pulled Galactus into his dimension, and statements made by Doctor Strange that if Cyttorak were to ever enter into the main Marvel universe, that he would be nigh unstoppable. By and large, the only real involvement with his character that you see is either the 8th Day storyline, the whole Octessence, and Juggernaut, and arguably his most powerful outside of his Tryon form when he's possessed by Cyttorak, and stories like Fear itself, where Colossus traveled to visit Cyttorak and then gained the powers of the Juggernaut after Cain Marco had chosen another god to basically give worship to. And so Cyttorak himself being so OP, it's wild here. And in fact, some fans will not be receptive to this, right? Some fans look at Cyttorak as just this immensely overpowered person that shouldn't really succumb to mortal emotions like love and fear and things like that, because he's so far beyond it. But the thing about his daughter is she says, the unthinkable has happened. You have lost 6 of your children, their immortality, their essence, stripped away by blight in the form of Calyx. Humans call it grief. And in turn, Cyttorak lashes out, right? Nothing can hurt Cyttorak. And his daughter responds and says, no, the great Cyttorak did nothing as his son killed his siblings and attacked his father. You are broken. And that's where Cyttorak just says, make it stop, right? In her response, I cannot. This pain is inevitable, but maybe there is one who can help if it is not too late. Now, here's an important thing to understand here, right? That on the surface, it is a Spider-Man story, right? But more so than that, it's Joe Kelly writing a story about emotional intelligence, right? I mean, how often have any of us felt the pain of loss? And how great would it be in experiencing that pain if you could just shut it off, right? Just turn that off and just not have to deal with it for a little while. And then maybe deal with it when you feel like you're ready, right? Data from Star Trek and his emotion chip, but it doesn't work that way, right? We as human beings, we cannot compartmentalize emotions, and we cannot compartmentalize how we feel. We have to deal with it as it comes to us. And Cyttorak, being so far removed from humanity, being so incredibly powerful that very few things can actually challenge him, for the first time in his existence, he's experiencing fear, and he doesn't know how to handle it, really grief. And so in turn, you switch back over to Spider-Man, and he says, horrifying as it is, the blight is a force of nature. It exists to cull souls from existence. Why? Might as well ask why there's gravity or muons or quasars. It doesn't matter. Doctor Strange figured out a way to hide our entire dimension from this thing, but it took the power of a god. It took Cyttorak. I'm a kid from Queens who got a crash course in magic last week, but with the slice of power I got from a god's daughter, I think I can make it work. I can cast the casket of Cyttorak continuously until I die. Literally, he's willing to sacrifice himself in order to keep the entirety of the universe safe. And that's what Doctor Strange realized. Spider-Man was the only one who would be willing to do it. But in the end, he's met by the arrival of Cyttorak, who says, Failure is inevitable. Maybe not today, but with the power of my blood coursing through you, you can live 100 years. But the blight is part of the prime fabric of the universe. It will prevail eventually. And that's where Peter just kind of acknowledges that and says, I know. Right? Like, I totally get that this is a stopgap. I totally get that this is not going to keep this thing at bay forever, right? We can push it away. But the moment that I die and I cease to cast this spell, it's going to come back. The door's going to reopen, and then anybody who can't fend it off is going to be destroyed. But that's where Cyttorak kind of cuts him off, and he says, the blight will prevail. Why do you fight? Why? When life is so fragile. And this is probably the most important part of the story. And it really shows that Joe Kelly perfectly understands the character of Spider-Man as he writes him, because Peter Parker's written to say, despite the magical craziness of the last few days, this is the only life I have. Most of the time, it's hard. It's not fair. Sometimes it flat out sucks, but it is my life. There's not another one anywhere like it. It's beautiful exactly because it is so fragile. Every life is like that. Even if in 1,000 years, my life and anything I ever did won't matter, it matters today. And so today is worth fighting for. And it's a profound statement. It is a very profound statement, right? Like, at any moment, we could just turn blue and fall over. And so every act that we commit to, every person that we love, every piece of food that we taste and we enjoy, it matters. It's important. Number one, because you can never get that moment back. You can never rewind. You don't get to start over, right? And just kind of do things a little differently this time. And number two, because everything we do has an impact on the people around us, and everyone has an impact on us. The 6 degrees of separation. And what he says is, with a view to the horizon of infinity, I do not expect you to understand, Cyttorak, and I don't care. I'm alive, I'm fighting, just like everyone else. That for Spider-Man, it's the meaning and it's the purpose. It's the one thing Cyttorak never grasped. But then he does. He pushes Spider-Man out of the way. And then you get this really, really cool monologue, right? Where he says, a reading from the book of the Vishanti. Earth's champion recalls that day and the words of the immovable god Cyttorak. I hurt, he said, and I see no end to that pain. But if you can act in the face of loss, of your insignificance and fragility, then so can Cyttorak. I will become the crimson casket that shields this world, this dimension, from the horror of blight. I will protect my remaining children, flawed as they are, and this world. This is the new covenant, not forged on a whim, not even forged by my own will. I make this pledge because I grieve, and I fear that without action, grief is all that will remain. On this day, Doom, Sorcerer Supreme, taught a god what it means to live, and forged the barrier that would forever shield our universe from the blight. Now, here's an important thing to understand here about what Joe Kelly's doing, and it's very easy to read between the lines. Joe Kelly effectively just wrote Cyttorak out of Marvel Comics. That's really what he just did. By saying that Cyttorak will eternally stay here in this place and keep the universe protected, he's no longer occupying the Crimson Cosmos, and so we will likely never see him again until someone returns him to the Crimson Cosmos. Now, at the end of the day, as long as Cyttorak still exists, as long as he's still alive in some capacity, Juggernaut will likely continue to be able to channel his power. As long as he has the Crimson Gem, the abilities stay. So there's no reason to believe that Cain Marko will lose his power as the Juggernaut, but he's also free of the influence of Cyttorak. He'll never be called back like he was during 8th Day and forced to basically amass an army using 1/8 of the human population, and he'll never be possessed by Cyttorak in the same way he was during the Tryon storyline, albeit neither of those have happened since they initially happened. But the fact is, Cyttorak is no longer a part of the, canon Marvel Universe. He is, but he's not. We may never see him
him again. And it's one of the things that I really haven't seen people talk about, but it's one of the most important things to take away from this story. I've seen Marvel do it a million times over the last almost 30 years. So the fact remains, right, that following this, Spider-Man just sort of goes back to his normal life, right? He's like, I never want to do magic again. I am done with this. And Doctor Strange's like, fair enough, right? I totally get it. You died like 7 or 8 times and all that kind of stuff. You were forced to endure some pretty hardcore circumstances. I totally get that you're kind of finished with it. And then following that, he just kind of makes his amends to various people who were out there that he had somehow wronged in various ways, right? When he was pretty cold and callous to Aunt May, when he was just super mopey and depressed when it came to Felicia Hardy, all that kind of stuff. You have Calix, who's basically locked away by his sister. She will likely become the new ruler of the Crimson Cosmos. And it's just kind of celebrating the lives of the people around him, as well as mourning those who were killed and who have passed away in all of this. Of course, Peter loses the power of the Juggernaut and goes back to his normal self. It's not a bad interim story. I mean, that's all this was. 8 Deaths of Juggernaut was just a way for Marvel to kill time until they can move on to like the next story of whatever it is that Spider-Man's going to be doing. I have no clue what it is, but it was a fun story. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. I enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.